motion to reconvene in open session. If I could have a mover and a seconder. Moved by Karen Schnarr, seconded by Sandy Shantz. All those in favor, please indicate so. Thank you. We are now reconvened in open session. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is a traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada. Colleagues, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act to declare? Seeing none, and we have nothing that comes out of closed. The consent agenda items before us are 7.1 through to 7.4. Would anybody like any of the agenda items removed to have a discussion on? It's confirmation of the minutes of February 15th meeting, Missing Persons Act 2022 annual report, a sponsorship request from the Ontario Association of Police Services Board, and the annual report from the University of Waterloo Special Constable Service. I'm seeing nobody indicate, so I would entertain a mover and a seconder to accept those agenda items. Moved by Karen Schnarr, seconded by Sandy Shantz. All those in favor? That is carried. Agenda 8 item is business arising from the minutes. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Correspondence, there's none. Police services report. The first one is Intelligent Notes 2022 annual report, and I will throw this over to Chief Crowell.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. Happy to join you for this March meeting. Today we have a few items for the board and public consumption. The first one is tied to item number 11.2 as well. We'll be speaking to our commitment to the race-based data collection strategy and the incorporation of this strategy into our practices. So the first presentation will be bringing Dr. Amanda Williams to provide the bulk of the presentation, and this will go into the second item, which is use of force statistical report, the annual review. And very proud of the work that Mandy and her team has been conducting really over a couple of years. Our relationships to the academic partners, Dr. Les Jacobs and Lauren Foster, they are guiding our practices internally, and we're very proud of the work that we're carrying through. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mandy to walk us through the intelligence notes presentation. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I will just share my screen. In theory, there we go. Is it doing what it should be doing?
We're not seeing it. We see
Not
you,
yet.
and that's nice.
That's good. It's not my intended outcome though. Hold on. So let's see if I can.
We're there.
That is better. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. So sorry, I'm having some difficulties here sorry, apologies.
You certainly aren't alone with the challenge of screen sharing through Zoom.
Yes, thank you. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better. Oh, I almost accidentally left the meeting, which would not be good at all. So let's see if I can't do it. Just trying to get my notes up at the same time and struggling today. Okay.
Do you want us to try share it from this end?
Let me try one more thing and then
Okay.
leave. Okay. Yeah, I think maybe. Oh, you're seeing.
We can see it now. Are you sharing it or is that us?
I believe I'm sharing it. So
Well
Okay.
done.
thanks. Okay. So yeah, sorry about that. Talking about intelligence notes today. Okay. So brief summary background for context, either as mandated by legislation or required by the board, WRPS officers are currently required to provide perceived grace and force-selected interactions. And these are use of force, regulated interactions, intelligence notes, and search of persons in custody. And they've been providing this information since 2020. In January 2022, WRPS launched their race-based data collection strategy, where we work with our academic partners, Drs. Les Jacob and Lauren Foster, to use this perceived race data as a tool for uncovering and addressing systemic racism where it might exist. I feel like I've lost the slide visualization at this point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, could someone else maybe share the slide presentation, and I'll do the narration. Sorry about that.
Okay, we're working on it. Technology is wonderful, except when it doesn't work.
That's great. Can we just go full screen on that one?
It looks like it's full screen in here in this
Oh, is it?
boardroom. Yeah.
Okay.
Hang on.
It isn't here. Like I see the note
Yeah.
side and everything. Yeah.
There we go. Perfect.
Super.
Okay. So what we're using this data for is a tool for uncovering and addressing systemic racism where it might exist. So by centering person characteristics, including race in the analyses, observed patterns in the data related to the four selected interactions will help us to determine the scope of the problem and the representation of individuals with particular social identities in selected interactions, the contributing contextual factors within WRPS, thinking policy, procedures, and operational practices, the training needs and track which approaches to service delivery work across different communities, and it will serve as a starting point for conversations with community and with WRPS members to strengthen trust, accountability, and transparency. Next slide, please. In compliance with board policy, the analytic focus is on identifying systemic issues. So the data will be used to identify and examine contextual patterns, and it serves as a communication tool. The focus is not at the individual level, whether this be the individual officers or individual members of the community. Instead, the analytic focus is at the level of the organization. And the race-based data collection strategy applies a human rights framework to better understand the delivery of police services and take a forward look into creating and actioning solutions where they're needed. Next slide, please. So this presentation will be focused on intelligence notes. All intelligence notes are created at an officer's discretion. Intelligence notes are used to document persons and/or activities for investigative purposes. They are most commonly used to link people, locations, and vehicles together. Identifying information in an intelligence notes can be collected where no interaction takes place, so it's an observation, where the identifying information is derived from a third-party source or is already known to the officer, or where the interaction with the individual is first lawful. And this report will present the intelligence notes entered between January 1st and December 31st of 2022. So it's the annual report. Next slide, please. Looking at the year by quarter, we see slightly fewer intelligence notes were entered in the first and fourth quarters of the year. And again, this is the annual report focusing on the 782 intelligence notes that came through. Next slide, please. Looking across years, so the first full year annual report occurred in 2020. And so this is the third annual report on intelligence notes, and we have a slight decrease in the number of notes that were completed in the past year. Next slide, please. A single occurrence can result in multiple intelligence notes. In 2022, 533 occurrences resulted in 782 unique intelligence notes. And of the 782 intelligence notes created last year, 555 focused on individuals, 223 focused on vehicles. So in absence of a person, this would be an unoccupied vehicle. And 4 contained general information, for example, increased drug use at a particular location as supplied by a paramedic in the region. Looking at the rationale for creating intelligence notes across 2022, we see that the notes were most frequently created for the purposes of documenting information related to drugs and drug trafficking. So the next slide, please. The race-based data collection analytic strategy will focus on those 555 intelligence notes that focus on person subjects. The Ontario data standards for the identification and monitoring of systemic racism suggest 2 different analytic approaches for identifying systemic racism. First is racial disproportion. Here, the proportion of racialized individuals within police data are compared to population proportions. And the assumption underlying this comparison is that everybody in the population has an equal chance of being included in an intelligence notes. But after a deep dive into the practice of creating intelligence notes, we know that information captured in intelligence notes is not created on a random basis. So people don't have an equal likelihood of being involved in an intelligence note. So in line with academic research and sector reporting, the race-based data collection strategy analytic plan is moving away from racial disproportions as the comparison, as they're problematic for a number of reasons. Instead, the race-based data collection strategy focuses more on the second analytical approach for uncovering systemic issues, and that's the disparity ratio. So when using a disparity ratio, the proportion of individuals from a racialized group is compared to the proportion of white individuals within the intelligence notes. And what we're really asking with this is, are groups represented differently within intelligence notes? Both disproportion and disparity indices are interpreted in the same way. Values greater than 1 indicate overrepresentation, and values less than 1 indicate underrepresentation. Ratios based on small numbers need to be treated with caution, because the addition or removal of a few cases will bump those numbers drastically, or they bump the ratios around drastically. Next slide. So I'm going to kind of delve into the data a little bit more now. So we're going to start looking at representation based on age. Here, what you're looking at is the gray bars representing the proportion of individuals in the population based on the 2021 census data. And the blue bars represent the proportion of individuals in intelligence notes by age category, which calculated based on year of birth. Disproportion is represented by blue bars being taller than gray bars, and disparity is represented by blue bars being taller than other blue bars. So in terms of both disparity and disproportion indices, intelligence notes created across 2022 had an overrepresentation of individuals aged 20 to 39 years. Next slide, please. So the next slide is looking at gender. Again, we have the proportion of the population in gray, and the blue bars represent the proportion of individuals within intelligence notes. In terms of both disproportion and disparity, men were overrepresented. Okay, so the male blue bar is taller than everything else. And on the next slide, we're looking at perceived race. So again, the gray bars are the proportion in the population, and the blue bars are the proportion in intelligence notes. And for this person characteristics, we see different patterns based on the comparison that's run. We have no evidence of racial disparity. So when comparing racialized groups to the white group, which is recommended by the Ontario Data Standards, we see no evidence that racialized groups are overrepresented within intelligence notes created last year. But when we look in disproportion as comparing to population demographics, we see that intelligence notes overrepresent Black, Indigenous, and Middle Eastern individuals. So those blue bars are taller than the population gray bars. East, Southeast Asian, South Asian, visible minority, apologies, and white racialized groups are underrepresented based on what would be expected due to population demographics. So those blue bars are shorter than the gray bars. Caution is needed here because of limitations comparing police data to population data and small numbers. The next slide moves us further along our analytic strategy by drilling into the race-based data by intersecting different fields for more contextual information. And here we're looking at the proportion of intelligence notes for each racial category by the rationale for creating intelligence notes. And due to small numbers, we're really focusing on the intelligence notes related to Black individuals, so that's the bottom of the graph, and white individuals, so that's the top line of the graph. And we see two incidences of racial disparities. We have overrepresentation of Black individuals in intelligence notes to document information related to firearms. So that's the red bar on the bottom versus the red bar on top. And we also have overrepresentation of Black individuals in intelligence notes created to document information related to human trafficking. So that's that green bar on the bottom versus the green bar on the top. Next slide, please. In summary, intelligence notes were created to document police-initiated observations related to drugs and drug trafficking. The analysis suggests that 20 to 39-year-old men were overrepresented in these intelligence notes. Racial disparity emerged for Black versus white 10 to 29-year-old men and Black versus white 20 to 29-year-old women, particularly for intelligence notes created to monitor activity related to firearms and human trafficking. WRPS's race-based data collection strategy will work towards improving our data collection and analytic practices with the goal of identifying racial disparities that might exist in police-public interactions and developing tangible outcome actions to address those disparities. This work will be done under the guidance of Dr. Les Jacobs and Dr. Lauren Foster, human rights experts who are our academic partners on the strategy. The next phase of work for intelligence notes will concentrate on how to best document how and where intelligence notes are used for investigative purposes, and this will include measuring tangible outcomes that will stand up to our robust analytic plan. And we look forward to reporting on our progress in the future. And that's the end slide now. Thank you.
Oh, Mandy, thank you very much. I may have missed it. The statistics about the percent of population, is that anchored in a profile just of Waterloo region, Southern Ontario, or national? How did we come up with those stats?
Those are for the CMA for the Waterloo region.
Thank you. So I see no questions or comments. Karen Schnarr.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always fascinated by your presentations. They're always, and the ones that will have always so interesting. And I love the fact that I know it's more work for you, but the fact that we're delving into more and more data and getting more and more granular, I think is outstanding because it then provides information from which you can make policy-based decisions. A bit of a random question because you got me thinking about age and overrepresentation. I think you were talking about the 29-year-old segments, but you could equally say, I think if you were looking at it, there's an under, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to wrap my head around the terminology for this. I find it a bit confusing. You could say, if I was looking at that data, there's an underrepresentation of youth and underrepresentation of, people over, I think, I forget what the, I don't know if it was 60 or 70, but wouldn't you kind of expect that? Because wouldn't you expect, you wouldn't possibly see as many intelligence notes happening on kids or people who are older. I'm just trying to think. So maybe I wasn't surprised by the 29, a couple of those demographics, because I would think if we were looking at some of these activities, which would prompt intelligence notes, that would sort of be the age demographic that you would find in it, because you wouldn't see it at the, sort of like a normal distribution. I don't know if there was a question in there, but like, it's just, so how should I be interpreting? Because like, if we're looking at the 29, like, how would I interpret those sort of end categories then, if as I try and think about the data that I'm looking at?
Sure, Chief, if I may. Yeah. So I think your question, it's kind of, I think it's more of a statement, and what I'm taking from it is, what you're saying to me is that you're not really surprised that you see more young people, because more young people might be engaged in crime for lots of different reasons. And I would say back to you, like, yes. And this is why moving away from population benchmarks is probably the way we want to go with our data, to look at disparities, because we know that we don't know, but what this data is suggesting is actually crime isn't equally distributed across person characteristics in our region. So comparing routinely back to a population benchmark is not a gold standard of comparison. It won't let us understand what is happening in our region. So we need to come up with different benchmarks to better capture what is happening in our region. And the use of force report gets into that in a little bit more detail, but that's kind of what I'm taking from your comment.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. And that's what I thought I heard you say at the beginning, then I got lost in the so I completely agree with what you're talking about and the approach that you're looking at there. So thank you for that clarification. That was very helpful.
So really appreciate this. And Mandy, I think Karen Schnarr's question and your answer reinforces that this is a journey, not a destination, and we'll keep refining this as we go along. So really interesting information and helpful, and look forward to more reports over time. It's great work. So I see no further questions. So next agenda item is quarterly use of force statistic report Q4 and annual summary. And Chief, do you want to kick this one off?
Thank you, Chair Redmond. And just to carry through the flow of conversation with our academic partners, just to reinforce, the WRPS on the intelligence notes front is leading on our public disclosure and the transparent approach we're taking with those intelligence notes. And that's part of our robust race-based data collection strategy. So with that, I do welcome Inspector Jason Boucher to the conversation today. And it'll be a dovetailing of the intelligence notes report with the use of force reporting. So Jason will walk us through the traditional report that he does, and then he'll be joined by Mandy Williams, who will complement it with the additional race-based analysis. Over to you, Jason. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Chief. Good morning, Chair Redmond, members of the board. Holly, are you able to share this next presentation?
My computer's a little frozen right now. Can you try?
Holly's computer is frozen at the moment, but we're working on it.
Okay, well, I'm going to give this a whirl then.
Okay. Jason, we're in your corner.
Thank you. Fingers crossed.
Jason, you look like you have accomplished it.
Fantastic. All right, so we're co-presenting today. I'd like to welcome Dr. Mandy Williams back to assist, who will be reporting on the latter half of this presentation, which is the incorporation of this report into the comprehensive race-based data collection strategy, which is an initiative that we had committed ourselves to when we started collecting this data in 2020.
Karen, do you want to intervene?
It's a purely procedural one. So I'm seeing everything. Like, I don't know if you think that you're showing us just the screen view, but like I can see it's yeah, perfect.
Is that better?
Thanks,
all right,
Jason.
I was almost there. So this report covers both the fourth quarter of 2022 along with the total for the entire year. So in the interest of time, I'll be focusing primarily on the annual data. So I'll begin where I always do, with the reminder that reportable incidents are those which require use of force report, either by legislation or our internal procedure. I'll remind you as well that there are two types of reports: individual reports and team reports, the latter being applicable only to the emergency response team for emergency operations. As well, each report goes through various levels of oversight. Annually, our use of force incidents totaled 374 for 2022, up from 307 the previous year. Recall that a change in procedure from 2019 to 2020, clarifying the need to complete a use of force report each time a conducted energy weapon was withdrawn from the holster, resulted in a marked increase in use of force reported incidents between those years. Use of force reports rose as well from 441 to 559. This represents a 22% rise in incidents and a 20% increase in reports. This is data that will closely be monitored over time to determine if this upward trend continues. A qualitative analysis was conducted to determine if there were trends in this data related to officer behaviors, and none were noted. It appears worthy of note, however, that incidents involving dangerous weapons and violence have also trended up during this same period. For instance, there were 44% increase in dangerous weapons calls year over year, from 163 in 2021 to 235 in 2022. And those are incidents that resulted in a use of force report. I would consider at this time to be a correlation versus a causation, but this is a matter that we will continue to monitor. Further analysis of this data, as illustrated in Figure 7, reveals that in this quarter, 4% of these incidents were what we would consider officer generated. The majority of these incidents are precipitated by a citizen call for service, which is a trend that we've seen over time. This slide provides an analysis of what call types resulted in intervention involving reportable incidents for the fourth quarter of 2021 relative to the third. You will note that the predominant driver continues to be dangerous weapons calls, those in which a weapon is believed or known to be involved. It is important to view this table in conjunction with Appendix C of this report. In doing so, you will note that call types other than dangerous weapons can and often do include weapons. In other words, the call classification should not be used to determine if a weapon was present or not. This table summarizes use of force options utilized excluding conducted energy weapons, which we'll see on the next slide. In this quarter, officers did not discharge their handguns, and there was one canine deployment which met the reporting threshold. Annually, there was an increase in the number of handguns drawn in 2022 versus 2021 at 59 and 50 respectively. Handguns pointed also increased from 53 to 81. Officers just discharged their handguns in 2 instances in both of these years, both of which were reported to the Special Investigations Unit and investigated. Similar trends were seen with carbine rifles, where deployment and pointed increased year over year. Outside of the humane dispatch of animals, carbine rifles have not been discharged by officers since their introduction. This slide provides a breakdown of conducted energy weapon use. Recall the procedural change between 2019 and 2020 resulted in that increase that you see on this slide. The CEW continues to demonstrate its effectiveness at de-escalating a situation simply through its display. Annually, CEW usage increased year over year. Recall that a procedural change in 2020 classifying any CEW probe deployment requiring Region of Waterloo paramedic services to attend and remove the probes is considered a minor injury for the purpose of reporting. Annually, minor injuries to officers decreased from 12 to 4, with serious injuries increasing from 0 to 4. Minor injuries to subjects increased from 20 to 26, and serious injuries remained at 1. As you know, beginning in 2020, the province of Ontario required the reporting on officer perception of subject race and provided the race-based categories by which this would be done. Figure 6 provides a summary of this data for this quarter and annually. Because of the challenges that we identified in using the use of force report to collect data of this type, our service made the decision to provide raw data in Appendix C in our report to the board. This appendix provides a summary of the subject's perceived race, how the call was generated, the type of occurrence, along with a short synopsis of the circumstances, the subject's profile behavior upon which the choice of intervention response was based, along with the response of the officer. And in conclusion, despite the frequency of interaction with members of our community, 81,832 occurrences and 3,387 arrests in this reporting period, very few, or approximately 0.1%, resulted in a reportable incident. Injuries to both subjects and officers occurring during these incidents remains very low. De-escalation training has been effective and will continue to be the cornerstone of our officer intervention training. And in 2022, we will continue this commitment with officer intervention EDI components. And This year, starting in January, the use of force report that has been mandated by the province has been improved with much better enhanced data collection that we can use for our continued analysis. And with that, I will turn it over to Mandy.
Thank you, Jason. I'll tell you when to progress the slides if you don't mind. So now we're going to turn the analysis to the analysis that aligns with the race-based data collection strategy. And here again, we're centering race and contextual factors within that analytic plan. And the analyses focus on the 325 reportable use of force incidents that involve person subjects that occurred last year. Next slide, please. So under the Ontario data standards for the identification and monitoring of systemic racism, again, we have two analytic approaches for identifying systemic racism. And here we're focusing on racial disparity. So this is the index that allows us to ask, given similar circumstances, do racialized and white individuals experience similar outcomes? And this is the question that's in line with the human rights approach to policing and is supported by a race-based academic strategy, race-based data collection strategy academic partners, Drs. Les Jacob and Lauren Foster. Racial disparities were interpreted such that values less than 1 indicate underrepresentation and values greater than 1 indicate overrepresentation. In line with standard practice, we use cutoffs of less than 0.67 to indicate concerning underrepresentation and greater than 1.5 to indicate concerning overrepresentation. Next slide, please. So here we have the 325 reportable incidences involving person subjects broken down by perceived race. What we see on that number row of the table is the raw number of incidences per racial category. The second row is the overall percentage of that 325 that fall under that racial category. And because of small numbers for some of our racialized groups, this analysis, the presentation will really focus on reportable incidences involving Black individuals, that's 14% of all incidences, Middle Eastern individuals, 6% of all incidences, and white individuals, 71% of incidences. But a full report is provided in the accompanying documents. When we calculate racial disparity, what we're doing is we're comparing the proportion of use of force incidents involving Black or Middle Eastern individuals as compared to the proportion of incidents involving white individuals. Without considering any other contextual factors, we see no evidence of overrepresentation of racialized individuals and use of force reportable incidences that occurred in 2022. All of the racial disparity indices are less than that critical cutoff of 1.5. In accordance with our race-based data collection analytic framework, we're going to start to layer in information to better drill into this pattern. So over the next slides, I'll present information related to the intersection of perceived race with subject behavior, coded as weapons perceived or not, followed by type of force deployed, followed by nature of the incident, and then we'll intersect all those things together to provide a more nuanced understanding of what's happening. Next slide, please. So the first, we're going to consider the type of force option deployed by race in absence of any other information. And I've simplified the use of force options in two ways for the purpose of this presentation. Use of force represents the most severe option deployed within a reportable incident. So each reportable incident has one entry on this table. And this was grouped into one of 4 categories: least, non-lethal, intermediate, and highest use of force option. And again, the board report provides a full description of this. Next, we calculated the percentage or proportion of reportable incidences for each of the 4 categories by racial groups separately. So we calculated the percentage within race, and then we calculated the disparity by providing the type of force between racial groups. And we see disparities. The Black individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences involving least type of force, that's OC deployment, physical control. And so what you're looking at there is the blue bar under that Black category compared to the blue bar under the white category. Black individuals are overrepresented in reportable incidences related to highest type of force. So this is firearms pointed or discharged. And what you're looking at is the red bar for the Black category as compared to the red bar for the white category. Black individuals were underrepresented in reportable incidences related to intermediate types of force. So that's firearms drawn. So that's the yellow bar for the Black group compared to the yellow bar for the white group. No other comparisons exceeded our critical cutoff values. Next slide, please, Jason. So next, we're going to consider subject behavior. Due to both small numbers and issues with the reporting tool we used in 2022, we focus on subject behavior as coded weapons were perceived to be present in the reportable incident or they were not perceived to be present. Again, the percentage of reportable incidences was calculated first within racial groups and then compared across racial groups. And we won't see a summation to 100% here because we're just looking at reportable incidences that did not involve perceived weapons. The other portion of the data will be on the next slide. First, what we want to look at is the height of the bars, so ignoring the color for now. And what we're asking with this is, in absence of any other information, is there a disparity in use of force reportable incidences when there is no weapons present? Racial disparity would be observed if bars for the racialized groups were taller than the bars for the white group, and we do not see that here. Black and Middle Eastern individuals were underrepresented in use of force reportable incidences when no weapon was present. Next, we can look at the color of the bars and compare those sizes across groups. When weapons were not perceived to be present, Black individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences involving the least type of force, that's OC, physical control and such. And that's that blue bar at the bottom. In 2022, police officers did not deploy intermediate, that's firearms drawn, or highest, firearms pointed or deployed, types of force on unarmed Black or unarmed Middle Eastern individuals. Next slide. Jason, perfect, thank you. So this slide presents that other part of the data. So this is reportable incidences where weapons were perceived to be present. Overall, we see that these bars are higher than the previous slide, and that's telling us that use of force reportable incidences most often occurred in response to situations where weapons were perceived to be present. So then we can look at the overall height of the bars. And although there was proportionately more reportable incidences involving Black and Middle Eastern individuals as compared to reportable incidences involving white individuals, the disparities did not exceed our critical cutoff values. And it's not visually depicted here, but is fully explained in the report. We have, when we look at the intersection between perceived race and perceived weapon type, Middle Eastern individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences involving perceived edged weapons, and Black individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences involving perceived firearms. Next, we can compare the color of the bars to see if the type of force deployed and the presence of the weapon differ by perceived race, and we do see a disparity. When weapons were perceived to be present, highest force options, that's firearms pointed and discharged, were more likely to be deployed on Black as compared to white individuals. And so that's that red bar between the Black and the white categories. No other ratios exceeded our critical cutoffs. Next slide, please, Jason. So as the final piece of standalone information, we also examine the nature of the incidents. So detailed incident coding and analysis can be found in the board report. But again, we calculated percentages within racial groups and then compared these across call types to calculate disparity ratios. And what we're looking at is comparing the height of the bars. So on the bottom of the graph, you see the different call types listed there. Using a critical cutoff of 1.5 to indicate overrepresentation, we see that Middle Eastern individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences that occurred in response to impaired drivers or person. So that's the third category for the left, from the left to find that impaired driver person type. And we're looking at the height of the blue bar as light blue bar as compared to the height of the yellow bar. If we move third category from the right to crimes against person, we see that Black individuals are overrepresented in reportable incidences that occurred in response to crimes against the person. So that's the dark blue bar is taller than the yellow bar. Middle Eastern individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences that occurred during the execution of warrants. So that's the second category from the right The light blue bar is taller than that yellow bar. No other disparities exceeded our critical cutoff of 1.5. And next slide, Jason, please. Thank you. So far, we've looked at racial disparity and use of force reportable incidences where context information is taken in isolation. But what we really want to know is when in similar circumstances do racialized and white individuals experience similar outcomes. And by layering the intersection or contextual information, so that's nature of the incident and subject behavior, we can begin to approximate the circumstances that might feed into use of force decisions as indicated by type of force, to examine whether use of force deployment was equitable, looking at perceived race of reportable incidents. When we examine racial disparity indices, when these factors are intersected, we have racial disparities that exceeded our critical threshold emerged for one type of incident, so that was crime against the person. And the data related to those reportable incidents is reported on screen. So when weapons were present and the incident was related to crimes against the person, Black individuals were overrepresented in the reportable incidences where police drew firearms. So intermediate types of force, or they pointed or deployed their firearms. That's highest type of force. Both the red and the yellow bars for the Black category are bigger than those for the white category. We see that Middle Eastern individuals were overrepresented in reportable incidences where firearms were pointed or deployed. So that's highest type of force, that red bar for Middle Eastern compared to the red bar for white. So what we're seeing here is percentage. In terms of raw number of the incidences, for Black individuals, we're looking at 10 reportable incidences. So that's 21% of all incidences involving Black individuals. These reportable incidences occurred when responding to citizens' calls for service related to crimes against the person. Firearms were perceived to be present in 9 out of those 10 reportable incidents. For Middle Eastern individuals, we're looking at 2 reportable incidences, and that's 11% of all incidences involving Middle Eastern individuals. Firearms were perceived to be present in 1 out of 2 of those reportable incidents. And for white individuals, we're looking at 18 reportable incidences, and that's 8% of all reportable incidences involving white individuals. Firearms were perceived to be present in 7 out of the 18 incidents. Next slide, Jason. So this is the first report to delve into race-based analysis of use of force reportable incidents, and therefore the stability of any observed patterns is not known. In addition, quantitative data is but one part of a fuller picture. But what this layered or intersectional approach to race-based data serves to do is provide a more nuanced understanding of the conditions under which use of force is deployed. And we set out to answer the question, given similar circumstances, do racialized and white individuals experience similar outcomes? And the result of the intersectional analyses indicate that there are racial disparities in both the contextual circumstances and the corresponding use of force deployment. Under the race-based data collection strategy, WRPS will work with the community to continue to improve our understanding of use of force incidents. This will be conducted under the guidance of Dr. Les Jacobs and Dr. Lauren Foster, our human rights experts and academic partners on the race-based data collection strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason and Mandy. Very interesting. Provokes a whole lot of questions on the way forward. Karen Schnarr.
Thank you. I have 3 questions too that are sort of statistically based and one more of a public policy question. So I was interested, thank you again for the presentation. And you start to, having the data, you're actually able to get a little bit more granular. And I think, Mandy, you were talking about that. My first question is just an understanding question, because I understand under and over representation in terms of the first presentation that you did, Mandy. So for this one with sort of use of force, so I'm looking at like figure 8, right? And so nothing is outside of the ratio band that we're looking at. Like it's all, there's no overrepresentation. But what does underrepresentation mean in this context? Because all of the numbers that I see in figure 8 are actually an underrepresentation. And that's maybe not a bad thing because of what we're looking, like the specific context of what we're looking at. So I'm just trying to understand what it means here.
Yes, so I'll spare you the statistical lecture if I can. Yeah, null hypothesis testing and things like that. So what we
Yeah.
can really take away from this is if it was equally distributed across all those groups, those ratios would look a little bit differently. And what we can kind of say with certainty is that when we can benchmark to a white group, we're not seeing more racialized individuals in that white group. I think that's what the comparison that makes the most sense here, just because of the way like null effects work. So there's no evidence of overrepresentation. So I kind of want to I'm going to leave it at that high level there. And I'm happy to,
Makes total sense. So
okay, report, I can work the kind of the testing comparison.
I just want to make sure that for this, what we're looking at for this one in particular, we're really only looking for overestimation as opposed to underestimation.
Yeah, that's the comparison that makes the most sense with this data.
Okay, perfect. My second question is, and Mandy, you had sort of talking about this sort of at the end of your presentation, because what starts to make me a little bit nervous as an academic is when we start to look at some of the sample sizes here, particularly when you start to hive data and you start to do it then by incident and then subs, and then you get, so your last example in that last chart, if you just look at the chart and say, oh my God, like massive overrepresentation for the Middle Eastern community, I think it was, we're talking, it's about one incident, because you only have a sample of 19 and you're actually only looking at one in that. So I think it's always super helpful, and I'm glad you contextualized it, because the N starts to get really low in some of these, to be able to draw, which will lead into my next sort of question about public policy. Because if the point of all of this is so that you can start making public policy decisions, if you're actually only talking about maybe one or two incidents out of whatever, it can sometimes be a bit dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's why, over time, it's the replication of the patterns that is actually more meaningful than the actual numbers themselves, in my very humble opinion, right? So are we seeing similar patterns over time? So those patterns always have fluctuations, but it's how stable is that pattern? And that's really where we're going to want to address, that's really when we want to address things. So this is kind of the first step in a long-term plan to make sure that whatever change we make in response to these things makes sense. It's evidence-based and also monitored over time to make sure it's successful.
Well, and I take your point, Mandy, in that if you don't have the data, you can't even start to find patterns. So you have to, so I love the fact, like the work that I'm so supportive of the work that you and Jason are doing and the whole team is doing, looking at this stuff, which leads into my third question. And thank you, Chair, for indulging me, is, okay, so let's, we're starting to look at this, we're starting to see some information. How do we then take this data? And if we're saying, look, there's an over-representation or whatever, or disparity, how does that then feed into the public policy making processes of WRPS so we can start addressing some of these inequalities and disparities that we're seeing? That may go to the chief.
Yeah,
Okay, Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Schnarr. Thanks, Mandy, for a great presentation. Just a couple comments. You're absolutely right. We're starting to get very granular locally about this, but one thing Jason mentioned was, as of January 2023, the province of Ontario has an enhanced use of force report that all agencies will be feeding into a more comprehensive analysis of race-based data to give that benchmarking across the province, which will allow us all to look at things on a more uniform playing field to inform public policy decisions. We as a service and as a profession have been acknowledging issues of systemic racism, disproportionate outcomes in the criminal justice system, and obviously the public dialogue on that. So we want to get granular. We want to understand what's happening in our community, but also across the province and across Canada, so that if there are changes to be made in training, orientation, the approach to any element of our interactions with the citizens that we serve, we are at the ready to make those adjustments, and to be really honest also at the same time about what these incidents represent. These are dynamic incidents involving violence, oftentimes citizen-generated interactions where our officers are responding and making split-second decisions about behavior that they're profiling in accordance with their training. So we're very much proud of the work we're doing here, but it'll be enhanced and informed by the work that's happening across Ontario simultaneous to this. And we're really in the first quarter of understanding where this is going as a province. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Chair Redmond, I don't know if it's for Mandy or the chief, because it kind of builds on Dr. Schnarr's question and your answer there. I mean, you finished off, Mandy, by talking about we'll continue to look at this and work together with other partners. So the academics, but also the I would assume the administration. So I guess the question is, the when is important in this. I mean, you just talked about it being early days, but would the outcomes kind of affect training, policy, procedures, recruiting? I mean, what parts of this will when we get more robust information or be able to see the patterns that you described, what are the things that will change, and when do you see those sorts of things emerging, whether it's for this board or more broadly across the province? So there's a lot of questions in there, but I was really building on the what's next part.
Again, Chief.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm actually going to move to Jason because he can speak to what we've already incorporated and then how we're using this, on a quarterly but annual lens to shape the training that we're developing now. So we should be proud of the work that we're already doing because we've been chasing these trends for several years. We now have this enhanced sort of, microscopic view on some of the individual interactions, but Jason can speak to how this is impacting our training, both for the mechanical, technical components of use of force intervention training, but also we're building some EDI training as well. So Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Chief. And Mr. McLean, great question. I would probably start by saying that several years ago, we worked off the assumption that we had challenges that we needed to face within our profession. And I think we've been very vocal about that. So we have incorporated things like EDI-based training, cultural awareness training, anti-Black racism training into not only our academic training, but we incorporate those concepts into our practical in-service training as well too. So where to the degree possible, we're able to incorporate those nuances within scenarios that require our officers to make decisions and look at the context of the individual that's involved and the behavior of the individual that's involved. So I think right now, we're going to just maintain that trajectory. We're going to maintain the incorporation of EDI principles into our training wherever we can. We talk about not having EDI as a standalone issue. It's embedded in the remainder of our training such that it's just part and parcel of the discussions that we have around. I don't like using the term use of force. I think the focus should be on de-escalation, crisis intervention and such. But I think to summarize, there's really nothing that would move us off of status quo that we recognized years ago that we did have our challenges that needed to be addressed. And we're going to stick with those until such time as something that might come out of the data would suggest that we take a different tact. Does that answer your question?
Ian, anything further? Okay, Tony, your hand was up and went down. Do you have a question or a comment, or has it been answered?
I did. There was one of my questions answered. I was going to raise my hand again through you, Madam Chair. And that is, I presume that the shift to a disparity modeling or comparison statistically, is that somewhat due to the migration of crime? So it's not static based on your own population, because you do have crime migration from various other regions that would impact that proportionate, approach. Is that a fair comment, or?
Who would like to take that one? Okay.
Sorry, Chairman. I'll start and just shift to Mandy as well. But you're absolutely right. What we had up until very recently was 2016 data based on the regional population on demographics. We now have some enhanced regional data for 2021, StatsCan driven, but it is providing this enhanced lens related to criminal activity, profile, behavior of individuals that may be involved in criminal activity, or in this case, use of force, intervention, de-escalation behavior. But Mandy, you can maybe provide the larger provincial and national landscape on how this is being approached. And we're meeting the standards from the academic robustness that exists. So go ahead, Mandy.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, so again, a little bit of a complex argument that I'm going to keep high level, and I hope I reach that. When we make comparisons to the population, we're making particular assumptions about what crime looks like, how it's distributed across society, and also what in police public interaction looks like. So we're assuming that when we make a population benchmark, whatever police interaction we're looking at is normally distributed. Everyone in the population has an equal chance that population demographic actually matches who is in the region at a particular time. So making those assumptions. And we're also making the assumption that police behavior and person behavior is static, right? So it happens once and it stays static over time. It's not, but we know really police interactions are dynamic and involve two people, and they shift within the context of their interaction. So by moving our benchmarks to different things, we're actually able to apply analytical techniques that better map what these interactions look like and who might be reasonably captured within those interactions. And there's a movement within provincial data using the modernized use of force to provide better benchmarks or better comparison against what might be in regional data. So as a province, we're moving towards a more nuanced understanding of what these interactions look like and once we provide a better understanding, and we can identify, I'm going to say, tipping points where we might be better to intervene against things. We have more successful intervention techniques over time. That's the kind of the big statistics, long-term picture.
So leading from Dr. Schnarr's question about leading towards public policy on a provincial or a national level, those policies and actions are just as important as the ones we take regionally as well, right? And that's all driven by this information. Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so if I can just rejoin on that, our academic partners would say, actually, it's policy and procedure that is the leading, that's the thing that really will shift behavior. It's not at the individual. If we want systemic, solutions, it's at that systemic level. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you for a very robust discussion and a great report, and we look forward. I'm really gratified. I think the chief answered the question I had, which is how we compare to others. And Mandy, you did a really good job of talking about how that is actually going to inform what we do here on a broader basis. So look forward to hearing that over time. Thank you very much. The next agenda item is 2022 road safety highlights and 2023 road safety plan. So Chief, over to you.
Thanks, Chair Redmond. And I'm going to turn this to Deputy Hilton, who'll provide an introduction for this item. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Good morning, Chair Redmond and members of the board. It's actually the afternoon now. I'm here, honored to introduce Staff Sergeant Scott Griffiths, who joins us now from our Operational Support Division Traffic Services Unit. In 2022, under the leadership of Superintendent Tom Bursey and Inspector Donna Mancuso, a comprehensive road safety plan was developed. And so Scott's here to join us to provide some highlights from the 2022 road safety plan that helps inform some of our priorities for the 2023 road safety plan. So I will turn it over to you now, Scott. Welcome.
Thank you, Deputy, and Chair Redmond, members of the board, Chief, thank you for the opportunity to have me speak today in regards to our 2022 road safety successes, as well as our plan for 2023. With the encouragement of Inspector Butcher, I'm going to make attempts to share my screen. And
I just, for what it's worth, Scott, we actually have it and we can share it from here unless you want to take a shot at it first.
Well, I'm hoping that you can see the screen there already done.
Well done.
Lots of practice involved in that. So needless to say, I'll get started. Thank you again for allowing me to present the 2023 road safety plan to you. As you know, the Traffic Services Branch, as well as the WRPS, is responsible for collision investigation, as well as enforcement and road safety promotion. I would like to start by going over some statistics for 2022 that we encountered. In 2022, our fatal investigations decreased 12% to 13, with 15 fatal injuries as a result of those. That differs from 2021, where we had 15 collisions with 17 fatalities and 19 collisions in 2020. So we're seeing a reduction in our overall numbers there. Our major injury investigations increased 13%. These are investigations that involve, as stated, major injuries that typically involve my unit, the traffic services unit, investigating. And 46% of those fatalities were linked to the fatal four, which is speeding or aggressive driving, distracted driving, impaired driving, and seatbelt use. Impairment was found to be a definitive factor in 2 of our 13 investigations this year, and speeding was a factor in 6. Of note, 46% of those collisions occurred on rural roads. Just as a breakdown for the members of the board, as you can see on the left, the fatal injury collisions were largely spread out over the region, with rural areas taking almost 50% of the collisions. For major injuries, the municipal or the cities were largely represented, with the townships taking a smaller yet significant portion of those incidences based on their population size and road characteristics. Moving forward to our enforcement results for 2022, something that's of particular interest in the media as well as to ourselves is our impaired driving charges increased by 18% in 2022 over 2021, with a total number of charges totaling 896. Our total road safety charges, all provincial offenses issued, as well as other charges, totaled 21,121. The first 2 quarters of 2022 showed a decline in the total number of charges. I would chalk that up to operational challenges from the lockdown and the convoy protests and other strains on resources. But 5 of the final 6 months of the year showed overall year-over-year increases over 2021. Our stunt driving charges increased 15% over 2021 to 531 charges. This incorporates a full year of changes to the Moving Ontario Vehicles Act, which reduced the stunt driving threshold on local streets to 40 kilometers over the speed limit, and maintained the 50 over on 80 kilometer per hour roads and above. Of the total 21,000 charges laid, 9,442 of those fatal 4 charges were laid, with 4,532 charges laid in rural areas. This is a focus that we have both last year and this year, which is rural enforcement to reduce the number of fatalities and major injury investigations that we're facing in rural areas. Moving on, I'd like to present our 2023 priorities. This is a sampling of our 2023 road safety plan. One of the priorities of our plan is to combat impaired driving. As you saw earlier, our statistics involving impaired driving keep increasing. So we have a focus on continuing to conduct both mobile and static ride program initiatives, increasing our DRE available officers. Last year, we were able to train 30% more DREs in our traffic services branch to be available for those investigations involving impairment by drug, and increasing public awareness. This involves both social media and public events that encourage safe, sober driving. The next step is efficient intelligence response to road safety complaints. We are going to be taking a more streamlined internal process and utilizing data and technology, as I'll outline a little bit more in the next slides, to improve our response to road safety complaints, which are a major concern for members of the public and are a priority for both the Traffic Services Branch and the WRPS. Increased enforcement efforts. We are going to continue to use the monthly traffic enforcement teams, which will be laid out a little bit more in further slides, but they are an integral part of our road safety efforts and focus on fatal 4 offenses and rural area enforcement. And we also have a monthly road safety focus, which focuses on working with neighborhood patrol and TSU, and to integrate our efforts with provincial and national efforts to combat things such as impaired driving or commercial vehicle enforcement or seatbelt use or distracted driving. In the field of impaired driving, last year, WRPS laid 896 impaired driving related charges, and we conducted 100 evaluations by DREs. These are extensive examinations done by the DREs that conduct psychophysical evaluation of a person's impairment by drug. As well, we laid 52 drug driving suspensions. These are suspensions that were issued to drivers after the presence of drugs was detected on our ADSE, which is the device you can see in the photo there, that detects the presence of cocaine and cannabis in novice, young drivers, and commercial drivers. This is a particular worry, as young drivers and commercial drivers are some of the most either inexperienced or the ones tasked with the most important cargo and heavy vehicles that can cause a lot of damage. Our goal, again, is to increase ride initiatives in 2023, raise public awareness around drug and impaired driving, especially when it comes to youth. So efforts will be made to reach out to youth to both explain the requirements, as well as making or helping them understand that we are actively enforcing, and it will have implications if you are found to be driving in that condition. As said earlier, we like to expand and create a more efficient and intelligent response to our road safety complaints. So currently we have one black hat radar device in our TSU, which is a device that can covertly evaluate traffic flow and traffic patterns in a specific area. And it also provides us with a robust set of data that we can use to best determine when to deploy, how to deploy, and where to deploy traffic enforcement. This will help us maximize our successful outcomes while reducing the number of member hours spent at ineffective times and locations. In a nutshell, what it helps us do is determine not only whether a location is suitable for enforcement, but also gives us the opportunity to best determine when to be there, because in a lot of situations, members of the public have concerns which are very valid, but it's more about when as opposed to where. Last year, our Black Hat was deployed 23 times throughout the region, and those were sourced primarily from the public's road safety complaints. So we're taking the device and deploying it to a location where the public has expressed a concern to get the data that we are discussing today. We're also conducting internal process changes to enhance efficiency and response. As the number of road safety complaints increases, our ability to process and to respond efficiently and with suitable circling back to the public with results will be adjusted and refined so that we can be more receptive and more responsive to the public. Monthly enforcement teams, as stated before, are a very integral part of achieving our road safety goals. We are currently using teams consisting of 3 officers, one from North, South, and Central divisions, and one of a TSU officer as a leader per month. Last year, those teams laid 1,722 charges and conducted 2,333 hours of enforcement. Their primary concern after developing a monthly plan is to focus on complaint areas and aspects of the road safety plan that dovetail with the month that they are working under, such as this month. A primary focus of the road safety plan is impaired driving interdiction. So they will be assisting with ride programs and other impaired driving interdiction that we can conduct using that team. And I know that the discussion, I know it comes up in a lot in discussions regarding traffic services and WRPS traffic enforcement about the importance of the Fatal Four. So it cannot be understated that the Fatal Four are called those for a reason, because as you can note here, 46% of all fatal collision injuries were linked to a Fatal Four expense. That's nearly half of every fatality we have. Impaired driving, another Fatal Four factor, was up 18% in 2022, and we saw a 15% increase in aggressive driving in 2022. These are behaviors that we know in concrete terms lead to fatalities and major injuries. Another focus for the road safety plan for 2022 as well for 2023 is the focus on rural enforcement. We have the benefit of living in a region with a beautiful rural areas. However, the roadway characteristics, the speeds that we find lead to higher negative outcomes when it comes to accidents and road safety complaints. A majority of our fatal and significant percentage of our serious injury crashes occur on rural roadways. Our continued enforcement in rural areas is key in meeting our goal, and visibility is also key, as is public awareness. We have a partnership with Rural Roads Alliance, and we also conduct social media awareness for rural roads regarding specialized vehicles that you may find on rural roads, such as horse and buggies or farm equipment, to increase safety and awareness of those being present on our roads. And barring any, sorry, I'll just have to try it. Now the problem will be trying to end my slideshow.
You're a victim of your own success.
That's right.
Sandy Shantz had a hard stop at 12:10, but she really wanted to acknowledge and compliment the focus on rural accidents and rural roads, and to remind all of us that it's not just those country highways and byways, it's also the settlement areas. So Sandy wanted that expressed. Thank you very much for that focus. It's very, very important. And we've certainly heard it from other rural colleagues and constituents. Ian, go ahead.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Redmond, just wanted to go back to the impaired and the roadside impaired. At one point, and I'm trying to remember, I'm maybe having a senior's moment, but in the not too distant past, the accuracy and the training for the drug roadside units was a challenge. I assume, are there more officers that are trained with that equipment, and is it as the accuracy of those roadside drug indicators improved? Because I think that's something, it may have been right at the start of when I started on the board maybe 3 years ago, that there was some discussion around that was an emerging issue. We didn't quite, the technology and the training wasn't quite there.
Scott, do you want to respond to that?
Absolutely, Chair. Mr. McLean, I'm not aware of any issues arising from the efficacy of the ADSE, which is, I think, what you're referring to. It's members of my TSU are the trained members to utilize that device. They have extensive training when we do initiate them into using that device. And I can tell you that provincially, we're one of the leaders in the use of that device to detect the presence of cocaine and cannabis in the saliva of roadside drivers. So there's never been an issue that I've been aware of the efficacy being an issue. And I think that going forward, the device is very robust, and it certainly has been serving us well.
Yeah, just let me be clear. I wasn't saying there was. I think the discussion early on was making sure there was enough trained officers, because that was a rising, I mean, impaired, still a problem, but for younger people, it's much more drugs that might be the issue. And I think that was the discussion around, did we have enough of your team that was appropriate? And you've answered that. So thank you for that.
Yes, and we've also had the opportunity, Mr. McLean, to receive grant money to purchase additional units. So we do have more units available and more officers trained.
All good news. Karen Quigley Hobbs, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. Just a very general question. In terms of the trending up of the fatal 4, what's the time period that we've been looking at there? Has it been like the last 5 years that it's been trending up, the last 10 years? Just curious.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Quigley Hobbs. I would say that the percentage of fatal 4 collisions or those that involve the fatal 4 have been increasing, and I can't give you the statistics exactly, but suffice it to say is that when the advent of distracted driving has become a more prevalent issue, as well as speeding becoming something that seems to be, stunt driving used to be a bit of an anomaly, but now seems to be becoming more of an issue. And I can tell you that obviously as those numbers increase, the opportunity for injury and death go up significantly, and thus go our stats. So I would just say that those are probably the emerging trends. Seatbelt use is obviously still a concern, but it is one that we have managed through public awareness and enforcement to encourage a vast majority of people to do. But distracted driving and speeding and impaired driving, obviously, which is very concerningly high, has been coming back from the 2019 levels.
Thank you.
I have to tell you that one of the points that I was really interested in was the black cat utilization, and the fact that that is used in response to community concerns. And I'm wondering, and Scott, I don't know if you're the person to answer this, but I hope that communities are aware of the fact that we are being, as a service, responsive to their needs, and that they see evidence of that. I'm just wondering, do we have a robust communication plan that we let them know that we are listening to them and hearing them?
Well, that's certainly, Chair. Thank you for the question. Certainly, Chair, that is one of the parts of our streamlining and efficiency efforts here is when possible, we do our best to to kind of circle back and to give the public an idea that we are indeed responding. We do have situations where people are obviously concerned about their neighborhoods, and if they see officers out there after making a complaint, it certainly reinforces that they are heard, but changes internally here to make sure that we are being more responsive on that end, to make sure that people understand that not only are we seeing or hearing their issues, but we're also responding and evaluating them as well. And that'll be, we're hoping to improve that in the coming days and months, because our volume of complaints has gone up significantly as the years have gone on.
Thank you very much. This is, again, very informative. I see no questions or comments, so thank you for your presentation. And our next agenda item is monthly Chief of Police report. So over to you, Chief.
Thanks, Chair Redmond. I am going to just do a brief share of presentation here, a couple slides to display. So just to walk through the monthly Chief of Police report, a couple slides. Very busy month as the weather starts to warm up and we start to head towards the spring. And although we're reporting regularly on our crisis call diversion program and our impact team, just want to report some promising statistics from January, where in the month of January, we had 29 calls diverted successfully from our crisis call diversion program. And you can see some statistics here handled by the crisis call diversion team, 15 that were handled directly, 12 that were flagged for follow-up by mental health professionals, and then a couple that through their handling were rerouted to patrol. But in total, when we combine this new capacity with our mental health impact team and our co-response, we're now diverting upwards of 22.5% of our mental health related calls to these enhanced capabilities. So we'll continue to report in more detail as things unfold. Heading into the month of March, we kicked things off with the Polar Plunge, which was a very fun and successful undertaking for our service in the community. We were joined by so many incredible teams and individuals who made the plunge with us, over 120 in total, raising over approximately $46,000 for Special Olympics. And it was very heartening to see so many members from the community come out and to support the Special Olympics athletes and their adventures in sport. And have to give a shout out to the Codfather, Ron Cottle, who raised $15,000 on behalf of this great cause. You'll also recall we were at the KW Titans game for their kickoff of their season, wrapping up our partnership in Black History Month. So that was a nice occasion as well. We continue on a daily, weekly, monthly basis with our community engagement. We're happy to celebrate within our facilities a number of groups we've hosted recently, such as Nigerians in the region of Waterloo, Nairo, as well as at our North facility, the Ghanaian Canadian Association. This past weekend, we're celebrating Ghana Independence Day. And Chair Redmond and I often find ourselves at the same occasion, such as the Real Life Irish Festival, kicking off celebration of Irish Heritage this month, or at the African Canadian Association of Waterloo Region and Area New Space dedication. But this is just a snapshot of some of the events in the past week where our service has been involved with the community, hosting and also celebrating many occasions. And that's an ongoing commitment that we obviously make. Turning to some operational matters, we're trending to continue to look at our robberies. That was a concerning trend in last year of the total number of robberies. And in the past 2 months, we've had 9 armed convenience store robberies, one suspect entering into, as you can see on the map displayed in this picture, a number of convenience stores with brandishing either a gun or a knife in the robbery attempts and the successful robberies. And we're looking for the public's assistance in locating this individual, who was also accompanied by a driver to get away. So I can tell you that our frontline response, our general investigations unit, as well as our robbery team, is obviously working hard on solving this and other robbery cases, but it continues to be a focus for our operational teams. And also just giving a snapshot of some of what Staff Sergeant Griffiths was discussing about traffic enforcement. Through the course of our regular patrols, we're often not only doing our regular patrolling and traffic enforcement duties, but we're also, through those traffic stops and interactions, coming across drug trafficking and organized crime related behavior. So on this slide just displays a couple of incidents from March 13th and March 1st, where officers were encountering those trafficking significant number of drugs in our community, including the seizure of a loaded firearm, money, and also a large amount of drugs. So just highlighting this because it shows that through the course of our regular interactions, our officers are encountering organized crime and also weapon-related behavior that we've reported before. So great proactive work, bringing some enhanced community safety through our daily interactions. And to end on a very happy note, the board very proudly appointed very recently 2 new deputy chiefs. So as much as in the next couple of months, we will celebrate the remarkable career of Deputy Chief Hilton and look forward to doing that. So proud to welcome aboard Deputy Chief Eugene Fenton, who joins us for his first official board meeting as Deputy Chief. He assumes the role of Deputy Chief of Administration and Member Services. Incredible leader, incredible compassionate and caring and dedicated individual who's joined the team and given us a great fresh start to March. And in a couple months, we'll welcome Deputy Chief Jen Davis, who will assume the neighborhood policing and investigations portfolio from Deputy Hilton and carry on the great work happening there. And she is also a remarkable police leader who brings with Deputy Fenton decades of police experience locally, a commitment to community, a commitment to policing excellence. And they join a very robust senior leadership team who reflects the great work that our service carries out. So happy to end on that happy note. to welcome our 2 new deputy chiefs. And we will look forward to an occasion that the board can recognize them publicly. So I'll end on that note today. Madam Chair and members of the board, subject to any questions about those matters or anything else, very happy to wish everyone well for a safe and happy March.
Thank you very much. And I would just have to say that I don't know if you could see the applause, either people are doing it physically or with their icons, just to say a great report and welcome aboard, Deputy Fenton. And we will have time to bid farewell and honor Deputy Chief Hilton before she leaves us. But a great addition to the team with Deputy Jen Davis and Deputy Fenton. So that is a really positive note to leave on. I have no new business. Is there any future business? Any future agenda items? Information items? So I just want to let the media know that once we're adjourned, they're welcome to log into Zoom if they're not already in on the call. And Chief Crowell will be available to answer questions from the media, and I believe that Sherry Greeno will take over quarterbacking that. So if there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. If I could have a mover, Karen Schnarr, seconder, Karen Quigley Hobbs. All those in favor?